My mother delivered the news like she was reading a lunch menu. She told me the house was sold and gave me exactly 1 month to get out. 6 months later, she texted to ask why I was still there, and I just laughed. The only person who did not know the truth was the woman who thought she had thrown me to the wolves. When she steps back inside, she will finally understand that the power has shifted hands. My name is Riley Cruz. I am 29 years old, and my official job title at Beacon Sage Technologies is Senior Cybersecurity Analyst. In simple terms, people pay me a salary to sit in a dark room, stare at lines of code, and predict where a thief is going to break a window before they even pick up a rock. I am good at my job because I understand how systems fail. I understand that the weakest link in any security chain is never the software. It is always the people. I just never thought that the system I needed to patch would be my own bloodline. It happened on a Tuesday in Cedar Hollow, North Carolina. The humidity had finally broken, leaving the air cool and crisp, the kind of evening that usually signaled the comfortable start of autumn. We were sitting around the mahogany dining table that my mother, Gail Monroe, had polished to a mirror shine earlier that afternoon. The smell of pot roast and rosemary filled the room, a scent that used to mean safety to me. Now, whenever I smell rosemary, I only smell betrayal. The only sound in the room was the scraping of silverware against china. My father, Warren, was focused entirely on his green beans, pushing them around his plate as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. My older sister, Marlo, was scrolling through her phone under the table, the blue light reflecting off her manicured nails. My younger sister, Tessa, was kicking the leg of the table rhythmically, a habit she had never outgrown despite being 22. Then, my mother placed her fork down. It made a sharp clink that silenced the room. She did not clear her throat. She did not hesitate. She looked at me, her eyes flat and unblinking, and delivered the news as if she were reading a lunch menu. "We sold the house," she said. "The closing is in 30 days. You have exactly 1 month. Get out." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I looked at my father, expecting him to correct her, or at least look up. He did not. He kept his eyes glued to his plate, his shoulders hunched, making himself as small as possible. He was a man who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of being invisible in his own home. I looked at Marlo. She let out a short, dry laugh, barely more than a breath, and took a sip of her iced tea. She did not look surprised. I looked at Tessa. She was biting her lip, her cheeks flushed. She was not holding back tears. She was holding back a smile. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice sounding calm, almost detached. My training at Beacon Sage kicked in automatically. Threat detected. Assess the damage. "Who is we? Where are we going?" My mother picked up her napkin and dabbed the corner of her mouth. "Not we. Riley. Us. Your father and I. And the girls. We are moving to the coast. You are not coming." The air left the room. It felt as if a vacuum seal had been activated, sucking out all the oxygen. I had paid rent to live in this house for 5 years. I paid for the internet bill that Marlo was currently using. I paid for the groceries that made up the dinner we were eating. "I do not understand," I said. "Why I pay my share. I help out. If you are downsizing, I can—" "You are 29. My mother cut me off, her voice dropping a few degrees. It was the tone she used when she spoke to customer service representatives she intended to bully. "You are a grown woman. We are done raising you. It is time you figure it out on your own." "Figure it out," I repeated. "You are giving me 30 days' notice. Legally. You have to—" "Do not talk to me about laws in my own house," she snapped. "We have been generous enough letting you stay here this long. The house is sold. The new owners want it empty. That means you—" She stood up and began clearing the plates, signaling that the conversation was over. Warren finally looked up, but not at me. He looked at the wall, at a spot just above my head, his eyes glassy and vacant. Marlo smirked, a tiny, cruel twisting of her lips, and whispered something to Tessa that made the younger girl giggle. I sat there for a long time after they left the room. I could hear them in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of casual conversation. They were talking about the weather. They were talking about a television show. They had just dismantled my entire life, and they were discussing whether it was going to rain on Thursday. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning lazily above me. I listened to the house settle, the creaks and groans of the timber that I knew by heart. I thought about the money I had saved, the investments I had quietly made because I always knew, deep down, that this ground was shaky, but knowing it and feeling the floor drop out from under you are two very different things. The next morning, the erasure began. When I walked out of my bedroom, dressed for work, the hallway felt different. It took me a moment to realize why. The walls were bare. The rectangular patches of paint where the family photos had hung for 2 decades were brighter than the surrounding beige, marking the spots like scars. I walked into the living room. The large portrait of the 5 of us, taken when I was 10, was gone. The graduation photos Marlowe's framed in gold, Tessa's in silver, and mine in a simple wood frame were all gone. It was not just that they were packing to move. It was the specific, surgical precision of it. The house felt hollow, echoing, as if I had never actually lived there, as if I were a ghost haunting a stranger's property. My suitcase, the one I kept in the hall closet for business trips, was gone. I found it later, tossed into the garage, dusty and scuffed. They were already moving me out mentally. I stood in the center of the living room, the silence pressing against my eardrums. The pain that hit me then was not the panic of homelessness. I had money. I had a career. I could find an apartment. The pain was sharper, colder. It was the realization that they had been planning this for a long time. You do not sell a house overnight. This had been in the works for months. They had signed papers, met with agents, and discussed their future while I sat at that dinner table paying the electric bill. They had looked me in the eye every single day and lied by omission. They had decided to delete me. But as I stood there, looking at the empty hook where a picture of me holding a fishing pole used to hang, my sadness began to calcify. It hardened into something brittle and sharp. My mind flashed back to 2 months ago. It had been a minor thing at the time. I was working from home, running a vulnerability scan on a client's server, when I went into the home office to grab a stapler. My father had left a folder on the desk. It was open. I saw a document peeking out, something about a title search. I saw the words quit claim and survivorship. When I asked my mother about it later, she had waved it off, saying they were just refinancing to get a lower interest rate. I had believed her. I had wanted to believe her. But my brain, the part of me that hunted for glitches in secure systems, had filed that image away. Quit claim, survivorship. Those were not refinancing terms. Those were transfer terms. I did not cry. Crying is a waste of hydration and energy. In my line of work, when you find a breach, you do not weep over the lost data. You isolate the infected sector. You analyze the attack vector, and then you launch a countermeasure. I turned around and walked back to my room. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, a familiar blue comfort in the gray morning. I did not search for apartments. I did not look for moving vans. I pulled up the county public records database. It took me 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. The listing was there, hidden under a generic status, but the address was unmistakable. And there was something else. A detail in the property history that made my heart hammer against my ribs. It was a vulnerability, a massive, gaping security hole in their plan that they were too arrogant to see. They thought they owned this house. They thought they held all the keys. But my mother, for all her controlling nature, was sloppy with details. She assumed power rather than verifying it. I picked up my phone. I scrolled past the family group chat, past my friends, and found a number I had saved years ago, back when I helped a colleague dealing with a messy divorce. It was a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and aggressive real estate maneuvers. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. "This is Riley Cruz," I said when the voice on the other end answered. I need to retain your services immediately. I am looking to make a purchase, but it needs to be done quietly, very quietly. I paused, looking at the empty wall where my face used to be. I want to buy a house, I said, but the sellers cannot know it is me. That was the moment Riley Cruz, the daughter, died. And Riley Cruz, the adversary, was born. 6 months later, I was sitting in my favorite chair, a piece of furniture I had bought with my own money, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the heavy silence of secrets. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I glanced down. It was a text message from Mom. I picked it up, feeling the cool glass against my thumb. The message was short, frantic, and confused. Why are you still there? The new owners are coming by today for the final walkthrough. You were supposed to be gone months ago. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. They had been traveling. They had taken the money from the sale and gone on a cross-country tour, renting luxury condos, living the high life, assuming that the company that bought the house had kicked me out long ago. They assumed I was crashing on a friend's couch or living in a cheap motel. They had no idea. I looked around the living room. The walls were painted a soft sage green, a color I loved. The photos on the wall were artistic prints of landscapes I had visited, places where I felt free. The locks on the front door were high-grade biometric scanners. The deed to the property was locked in a fireproof safe in the floor of the closet, and on that deed, the name of the owner was listed as Hollowcrest Holdings, LLC. My mother asked why I was still here. I typed a reply, but then I deleted it. No, a text was too impersonal. They were coming here. They were driving up the driveway right now, expecting to see a confused daughter being evicted by strangers, or perhaps expecting to see an empty house they could visit one last time to gloat. They were expecting the victim. I stood up and walked to the front door, through the side window. I saw their car, a rented SUV. Pulling up to the curb, my mother was in the passenger seat. She looked annoyed. She was probably complaining that the lawn looked too well kept, wondering why the new owners hadn't torn out the hedges yet. I unlocked the deadbolt. It made a heavy, satisfying thud. My mother thought she had sold the house to a faceless corporation. She thought she had cashed out and erased me in one smooth transaction. She thought she was the player moving the chess pieces. She was about to find out that she was never the player. She was just the board. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Crossing my arms over my chest, I watched as they got out of the car. My mother froze, her hand halfway to the car door. My father stopped dead in his tracks. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in 6 months. "Welcome home," I whispered to the wind, to understand why I did what I did. You have to understand the architecture of the Monroe family. Every family has a hierarchy, an unspoken organizational chart that dictates who matters and who simply occupies space. In our house, that chart was etched in stone, and for as long as I can remember, my name was written in invisible ink at the very bottom. Living in that house was like dying by 1,000 paper cuts. It was never one massive, dramatic blow that knocked me down. It was the daily, dull ache of being unseen. It was the dull knife method of emotional erosion. A sharp knife kills you quickly, but a dull one just leaves you jagged and exhausted. Take dinner, for example. In the years leading up to my eviction, we ate together almost every night. It was one of my mother's non-negotiable rules. Attendance was mandatory. Participation, however, was selective. I would sit there, usually in the seat closest to the kitchen door, so I could get up to refill the water pitcher or fetch the salt without disturbing the flow of conversation. Marlo would launch into a detailed story about her day in marketing. She had this way of talking that demanded attention, using her hands, laughing at her own jokes, making even a mundane meeting sound like a high-stakes drama. My mother would lean in, her face glowing with pride, asking follow-up questions, hanging on every word. Then Tessa would jump in. Tessa was 22, but in my mother's eyes, she was perpetually 12. Tessa would complain about a professor or a friend who had slighted her, and my mother would immediately switch to protective mode, cooing over her, validating every petty grievance. And then there was me. I would sit there, cutting my chicken, waiting for a lull, waiting for the polite gap where someone might turn to me and ask how my day was. But the gap never came. They would pivot from Marlo's success to Tessa's drama, and then my father would make a comment about the traffic or the lawn, and dinner would be over. I would clear the table, I would load the dishwasher, and I would go to my room, having not spoken a single word other than to ask someone to pass the butter. It was not that they hated me. Hate requires energy. Hate requires passion. This was worse. This was indifference. To them. I was a utility. I was the person who fixed the Wi-Fi when it went down. I was the person who remembered to buy milk. I was the person who paid rent. That was the other thing. The rent. My mother, Gail, ran the house like a corporation where she was the CEO and the rest of us were employees. But while Marlo and Tessa were on the executive track, receiving bonuses in the form of affection and praise, I was in the mailroom. She controlled everything. The calendar on the fridge was her command center. The tone of the house was dictated by her mood. If Gail Monroe was unhappy, the air conditioning felt colder. If she was stressed, we all walked on tiptoes. She dispensed love like a performance bonus. It was not a right. It was a reward for compliance. Marlo got love because she made the family look good to the neighbors. She was the shiny object. Tessa got love because she was the baby, the one who still needed mommy. I got tolerance. And I paid for that tolerance on the first of every month, like clockwork. I transferred $500 into my mother's account. I had been doing this since the day I graduated college. She called it contributing to the household, but we both knew what it was. It was rent. Marlo, who lived at home for 2 years after college before moving in with a boyfriend and then moving back, never paid a dime. Tessa certainly never paid, but for me, the transaction was formal. "Did you send the money?" she would ask on the second of the month if the notification hadn't popped up on her phone yet. "Yes, Mom, it is pending," I would say. "Good. Groceries are expensive this week," she would reply, and that would be the extent of our interaction regarding my financial contribution. My father, Warren, was no help. He was a good man in the abstract, the kind of guy neighbors waved to, but inside the house, he was a ghost. He had mastered the art of strategic absence. He was always in the garage, or in the basement, or just stepping out to check the mail, when the tension rose. When my mother would snap at me for something trivial like leaving a book on the coffee table or walking too loudly in the hallway, he would look down at his shoes. He would pretend he was deaf. I think he loved me, in his own way, but he loved his peace more. Defending me meant confronting Gail, and Warren Monroe did not do confrontation. He chose silence. And in a family like ours, silence is just betrayal with a mute button. They all thought they knew me. They thought I was the quiet, boring sister who worked with computers. They thought I had a mediocre job and lived paycheck to paycheck, which was why I still lived at home. They were wrong. My job at Beacon Sage Technologies was not just working with computers. I was a senior cybersecurity analyst. My world was high stakes. I worked the night shift often, or disjointed hours that wrecked my circadian rhythm. While they slept, I was monitoring global networks for intrusion attempts. I was hunting for anomalies in massive datasets. My brain was wired to detect threats, to see patterns that other people missed. I would come home at 7 in the morning, eyes burning, smelling like stale office coffee, and my mother would be in the kitchen making smoothies for Tessa. "Shh," she would hiss at me as I walked in the door. "Tessa is still sleeping. Do not slam the door." I had just spent 12 hours stopping a ransomware attack that could have crippled a hospital network, and my mother was shushing me because the princess needed her beauty rest. I never corrected them. I never told them about the promotions. I never told them about the bonuses, and I certainly never told them about my bank accounts. I had learned early on that in this house, information was ammunition. If they knew I had money, the rent would go up. If they knew I had savings, suddenly the car repairs or the roof leaks would become my responsibility. So I played the part they wrote for me. I wore simple clothes. I drove a 6-year-old sedan. I brought my lunch to work. I let them believe I was scraping by. But in the dark, I was building a fortress. I invested 60% of my income. I maxed out my retirement accounts. I put money into high-yield index funds. Every dollar I saved was a brick in a wall that I was building between me and them. I did not want their validation anymore. I did not want their help. I wanted freedom. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by family. It is a cold, hollow feeling. I remember one Tuesday evening, about 3 months before the house sale announcement, I had come down with a severe flu. I was burning up with a fever, shivering in my bed. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I heard laughter downstairs. They were watching a movie. I could smell popcorn. I managed to drag myself downstairs to get a glass of water. I walked into the living room, wrapped in a blanket, looking like death. Marlo looked over the back of the sofa. "You look terrible," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Don't get near me. I have a date on Friday." "Is there any Tylenol?" I croaked. "Check the cabinet," my mother said, not looking away from the screen. "If there isn't any, you might need to run to the pharmacy." Run to the pharmacy. With a fever of 102, I stood there for a second, swaying slightly. My father glanced at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. But then my mother laughed at something on the TV, and he turned back to join her. I walked to the kitchen, drank tap water from a mug, and went back upstairs. I ordered medicine and soup from a delivery app. I paid an extra $15 for the rush delivery fee. That night, lying in the dark, shivering, I realized something fundamental. I was not their daughter, I was their roommate, and a roommate you don't like is easily replaced. I realized then that I could not react with emotion. If I cried, they would call me sensitive. If I yelled, they would call me unstable. My mother was a master at gaslighting. She could twist any emotional outburst into proof that I was the problem. She would say, "Riley, why are you always so dramatic?" while she was the one holding the match. I had to be like the systems I protected at work. I had to be cold. I had to be logical. I had to operate on code, not feelings. I started looking at my life through the lens of a security audit. Where were the vulnerabilities? What were the assets? What was the exit strategy? The house was their asset, but it was also their leverage. As long as I lived under their roof, I was under their thumb. I needed to get out, but I didn't just want to leave. Leaving was retreating. Leaving was admitting defeat. I wanted to leave on my own terms. I wanted to leave in a way that ensured they could never look down on me again. So I kept my head down. I continued to pay my $500 on the first of the month. I continued to listen to Marlo brag and Tessa whine. I continued to let my father look through me. I became a master of gray rocking. When they tried to provoke me, I gave boring, non-committal answers. "Riley, why don't you have a boyfriend yet?" Marlo would ask with a smirk. "Just busy with work," I would say, my voice flat. "Riley, that shirt is unflattering," my mother would comment. "It is comfortable," I would reply. I starved them of the drama they craved. I became a blank slate, and because they were so self-absorbed, they didn't notice that the blank slate was actually a mirror. And behind the mirror, I was watching, recording, and planning. I didn't know then that they were already planning to sell the house out from under me. I didn't know that my mother was already looking at condos on the coast. But my instincts, sharpened by years of being the outsider in my own home, told me that the ground was shifting. I was ready. I didn't need their love. I had my own resources. I had my own mind. And soon, I would have the one thing they thought they could dangle over my head forever control. I went to work that night, settled into my ergonomic chair, and logged into the secure server. The screens hummed with data. This was where I belonged. Here, the rules were clear. Here, if you made a mistake, you fixed it. Here, value was based on competence, not on how well you could suck up to the boss. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Don't forget to take the trash bins out when you get home in the morning. Your father's back is hurting." I looked at the message. I looked at the time. It was 2 a.m. "Okay," I typed back. I put the phone down and turned back to my screens. Let them sleep. Let them think they had me trained. The trash would go out. The rent would be paid. But Riley Cruz was waking up, and she was done being the glitch in their perfect system. It was a Thursday night, or rather, very early Friday morning. When the digital facade of my family finally cracked wide open, I was awake, which was standard for me. My circadian rhythm had long ago surrendered to the demands of network security. So while the rest of the house in Cedar Hollow breathed in the heavy, rhythmic sleep of the innocent or the ignorant I was online, I was not hunting for cyber threats that night. I was bored. It was a human, mundane boredom that led me to browse real estate listings. It is a habit a lot of millennials have. A sort of financial masochism where we look at houses we can supposedly afford, but will never actually buy because of interest rates. I was scrolling through a popular aggregation site, looking at properties in the next county over, just daydreaming about a kitchen where I didn't have to walk on eggshells. Then, the algorithm did something funny. It suggested a property near me. I froze. The photo on the screen was professional. High dynamic range, with the saturation bumped up to make the lawn look emerald green. It was a 2-story colonial with black shutters and a wraparound porch. It was my house. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor painting my face, and clicked the link. My heart rate did not spike. Instead, it slowed down. A heavy, thudding bass drum in my chest. $450,000. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Motivated sellers. I scrolled through the photos. They must have taken them on a day when I was at the office. That explained the Tuesday 3 weeks ago when my mother had insisted I go into the office for a change of scenery, even though I was scheduled to work remote. The photos were a masterclass in deception. The living room was bright and airy, stripped of the clutter that usually lived on the side tables. But it was the photo of the 3rd bedroom, my bedroom, that made my stomach turn over. In the photo, my bed was gone. My desk, with my 3-monitor setup and my server rack, was gone. In their place was a generic, beige daybed with a floral throw pillow that I had never seen in my life. They had staged my room. They had physically removed the evidence of my existence, taken the photo, and then I assumed put my things back before I returned home at 6 o'clock. The violation was so precise, so calculated, it made me nauseous. I looked around my actual room. My monitors were humming. My bed was unmade. But on the screen, this room was a guest suite, or a home gym potential. I read the listing description. Charming family home in desirable Cedar Hollow. New roof, updated HVAC. Sellers are ready to close immediately. Property will be delivered vacant upon possession. Vacant. I was the tenant. I had lived here for 29 years. I paid rent. In the state of North Carolina. Even without a written lease, I had rights. You cannot just promise a buyer that a house will be vacant when there is a rent-paying adult living in the upstairs bedroom. They were selling a lie. They were promising a clean slate to a stranger while the mess me was still eating cereal in the kitchen. I checked the activity log on the listing. Open house scheduled for this coming Sunday, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. I leaned back in my chair. Sunday, 3 days away. Earlier that evening, at dinner, my mother had mentioned that we should all go out to a nice brunch on Sunday. She said it would be a treat. She wanted to get us out of the house. She wasn't treating us to brunch. She was clearing the blast radius so the real estate agent could parade strangers through my bedroom. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs and wake them up. I did what I do best. I investigated. If they were lying about the occupancy, what else were they lying about? I opened a new tab and navigated to the County Register of Deeds. This is a public database, accessible to anyone with an internet connection and the patience to navigate a user interface that has not been updated since 2005. I punched in our address. The history populated. There was the deed from when my parents bought the place in 1995. There was a refinancing document from 2010. Standard stuff. But then I saw a cross-reference number attached to the parcel ID. It was a discrepancy I had noticed briefly months ago but hadn't fully explored. The property wasn't just 1 lot, it was 2. Years ago, my grandmother, my mother's mother, had lived in a small, detached carriage house at the back of the property. It had fallen into disrepair after she died and was currently just used for storage, full of old Christmas decorations and broken lawnmowers. But looking at the plat map on the screen, I saw that the carriage house sat on a subdividable parcel that had been merged clumsily with the main deed. I pulled up the digitized will from my grandmother's probate file, which was linked to the property history. My grandmother had been a sharp woman. She didn't trust my father's business sense, and she thought my mother was too loose with credit cards. I read the legalese of the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance. There was a clause regarding the secondary dwelling and associated land. It stated that upon her death, the title to this specific subsection of the property was to pass to her daughter, Gail, subject to a life estate, or in here the legal language got dense, a specific remainder interest held in trust for her grandchildren until the property was sold, at which point a percentage of the value of that specific parcel had to be distributed to them. It was a small hook, a tiny bureaucratic snag. It seemed that when my parents refinanced in 2010, the bank had overlooked this specific detached parcels restriction, or my parents had signed an affidavit claiming the trust was dissolved. But the trust had never been dissolved. I checked the state trust registry. It was still active, just dormant. My mother was selling a property that she might not technically own 100% of. She was selling the whole pie, forgetting that Grandma had sliced off a piece for the kids 15 years ago. I saved the PDF. I took screenshots of the listing. I downloaded the metadata of the photos. The next morning, the house was a theater of the absurd. I walked into the kitchen at 7 o'clock. My mother was wiping down the granite countertops with an intensity that bordered on manic. "Good morning," she chirped. "Don't forget, Sunday is brunch. You should wear that blue dress. It looks nice on you." "Sure," I said, pouring coffee. "What is the occasion?" "Just family time," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We don't do it enough." She was scrubbing a spot on the counter that was already clean. She was prepping the house for the showing. She needed me out, and she needed the house spotless. I drank my coffee and left for work. But I didn't go to the office. I drove around the corner, parked, and walked back. Slipping into the house through the back door, which I knew had a sticky latch that often didn't catch. I stood in the laundry room, listening. My mother was on the phone. Her voice was low, agitated. I know, she was saying. "We need a quick close. Warren is nervous, but I told him to shut up. The market is hot." Pause. "No, the girls don't know. Well, Marlo suspects, but she is on board as long as she gets a cut. Tessa doesn't care." Pause. "Riley." My mother let out a scoff that vibrated through the thin drywall. "Don't worry about Riley. I will handle her. She's a nuisance, but she has no spine. Once the papers are signed, she is out. I'm not letting her ruin this with her moping. Just get the listing live and bring me a buyer. I want to be in Florida by November. She has no spine." I recorded the audio on my phone. It wasn't admissible in court in some contexts, but it was excellent for my own morale. It was the fuel I needed to burn the bridge while I was still standing on it. I slipped back out of the house before she hung up. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a generic office park 3 towns over. I had an appointment with a man named Mr. Henderson. He was a real estate attorney recommended by the legal counsel at my tech firm. My colleague had described him as a shark who smiles. I walked into his office. It smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. I sat down and laid out my file. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for sympathy. I laid out the listing photos. I laid out my rent receipts, 5 years of Venmo transfers and canceled checks, each one labeled rent or house contribution. I laid out the grandmother's will and the property deed history. "I do not want a dramatic confrontation," I told him. "I do not want to scream at them over dinner. I want to handle this transactionally." Mr. Henderson put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the stack of papers. He paused at the rent receipts. Then he paused longer at the grandmother's will and the deed discrepancy. He looked up at me, and a slow, dry smile spread across his face. "Ms. Cruz," he said, "you have been paying rent." "Yes, $500 a month, every month, and you have never received an eviction notice, a 30-day notice to quit. No, they think they can just tell me to leave on the day of closing. They are incorrect, he said. You are a tenant at will. Buying a house with a tenant inside is a nightmare for a buyer. It effectively kills the deal if the tenant refuses to leave. He tapped the deed. But this, he said, pointing to the grandmother's clause. This is interesting. This is the cloud on title. If they try to sell this house and warrant that they have clear and marketable title, they are committing fraud, or at the very least, breach of contract. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. If they are selling something they think they own absolutely, he said, then we need to verify if they actually have the right to sell it at all. And if they don't, well, that gives us a very unique position. What position is that? I asked. The position of the spoiler, he said, or, if you are feeling ambitious, the position of the buyer. I looked at him. The idea hadn't fully formed until that moment. I don't just want to stop them, I said, my voice steady. I want to take the board away from them. Then we won't tell them a thing, Mr. Henderson said. Let them show the house. Let them accept an offer. Let them think they have won. And then, we will introduce ourselves to the title company. I left his office with a retainer agreement signed and a plan that was colder than the air conditioning in my server room. I went home that night and ate dinner with them. I listened to my mother talk about the lovely brunch we were going to have on Sunday. I nodded. I smiled. I passed the salt. I looked at the wall where my graduation picture used to be, and I felt a strange sense of calm. They were selling the house. They just didn't realize that the person they were trying to evict was the only one who had done the due diligence to actually own it. I went to sleep that night in the room that was currently listed on the internet as a guest suite. I stared at the ceiling, vacant upon possession. The listing had said, "We would see about that." Revenge is rarely a scream in the night. In my experience, the most devastating form of revenge is a spreadsheet. It is a series of documents, notarized and filed in triplicate, sitting quietly on a server until the moment they execute a command that changes reality. I did not want to burn my family's house down. I did not want to scream at them until my throat bled. I simply wanted to alter the administrative privileges of our lives. The first step was identity. I could not buy the house as Riley Cruz. If my mother saw my name on a purchase agreement, she would shred the document and laugh in my face. She would rather burn the equity than let me have a win. So, I had to become someone else, or rather, something else. I sat in my cubicle at Beacon Sage during a lunch break, eating a sandwich with one hand and navigating the Secretary of State's business portal with the other. It took me exactly 20 minutes to file the Articles of Organization. I needed a name that sounded boring, corporate, and vaguely local, something that implied money but lacked personality. Hollowcrest Holdings, LLC. It was perfect. It sounded like a mid-tier property management firm or a shell company for a dental conglomerate. I used a registered agent service to keep my personal address off the public listing, for a fee of $150 a year. A lawyer in the state capitol would receive my mail, on paper. Riley Cruz did not exist in this equation. Hollowcrest Holdings was a faceless entity, a blank check with a tax ID number. Next came the capital. My family thought I was living paycheck to paycheck because I let them see the version of me that shopped at discount stores and drove a sedan with a dented bumper. They did not see the version of me that had been maxing out stock options since I was 22. They did not see the high-yield savings accounts where I parked my bonuses. I went to a credit union 3 towns over, a place where no one knew the Monroe family. I sat across from a loan officer named Sarah, a woman with kind eyes who looked at my pay stubs and my asset portfolio and actually raised her eyebrows. "You have quite a bit of liquidity, Ms. Cruz," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "We can get you a pre-approval letter for up to $600,000 within the hour." "I need it to be in the name of my LLC," I said, "and I need it to be a commercial loan structure. I am putting 20% down in cash. She typed for a moment, the keys clacking rhythmically. Done. Walking out of that bank with the pre-approval letter in my bag felt heavier than carrying a weapon. I had the ammunition. Now, I needed the target to present itself. That is where Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, earned every cent of his retainer. We met again 2 days after the open house. I had spent that Sunday driving around aimlessly, killing time while strangers walked through my bedroom, judging my life. When I returned, my mother was ecstatic. A couple, the Millers, had put in an offer. It was $5,000 over the asking price. My mother was already talking about buying new patio furniture for the condo in Florida. But Mr. Henderson had found the glitch. The title issue regarding the carriage house and your grandmother's trust is a problem, Henderson explained to me in his office, but it is a specific kind of problem. For a traditional buyer like the Millers, who are likely using a standard FHA or conventional mortgage, the bank will flag this. The title company will refuse to insure the title until the trust issue is resolved. That takes time. It requires quiet title actions. It requires finding heirs. He smiled, a shark showing its teeth. Your mother wants a fast close. She needs the money now. She cannot wait 6 months for a court to clear up a messy deed from 1995. So the Millers will walk away, I said. They will run, Henderson corrected. Once their lawyer explains that they are buying a lawsuit, they will terminate the contract during the due diligence period. And that, I said, seeing the code execute in my mind, is when HollowCrest steps in. Exactly. An LLC can buy a property with a clouded title. We can write an offer that says we are willing to take on the risk of the title defect in exchange for a quick closing. Since you are the heir who would technically be suing, you know there is no actual risk. You are essentially buying the problem from yourself. It was brilliant. It was a legal heist. I went home and waited. I played my role. I did the dishes. I listened to Marlo talk about how she was going to miss the house, even though she hadn't contributed a dime to its upkeep in years. 3 days later, the crash happened. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my mother slammed the phone down in the living room. "Idiots!" she screamed. "Incompetent idiots!" I walked in, keeping my face mask of confusion perfectly in place. "What happened?" "The buyers," she spat. "They are pulling out. Something about the title. Something about Grandma's old shed in the back. They say it is too high risk. We were supposed to close in 3 weeks. My father was sitting in his armchair, looking pale. We already put the deposit down on the Florida place. Gail, if we don't sell this house, we lose that money. I know that. Warren, she yelled, do not tell me things I know. The panic was palpable. It smelled like sour milk. They were leveraged. They had spent the money in their heads before it was in their accounts. They were desperate. I went to work. I sat at my desk, opened my secure email, and sent a 2-word message to Henderson, execute protocol, the next morning, while my mother was frantically calling other realtors to see if they could find a cash buyer. Her phone rang. It was her listing agent. I was in the room, pretending to read a book. I watched her face. "Who?" she asked. "HollowCrest Holdings. Who are they?" She listened. Her shoulders dropped about 2 inches. The tension released. "Cash. Can they close in 20 days?" She listened again. Yes, we are aware of the title issue. If they are willing to overlook it, then yes, send the offer." She hung up and looked at my father. "We are saved. An investment group. They want the house for a rental portfolio. They are offering asking price. Cash. Close in 3 weeks." "Thank God," my father breathed. "They are corporate," my mother said, wrinkling her nose. "I hate selling to a corporation, but beggars cannot be choosers." I turned a page of my book. "That is great news. Mom." She didn't even look at me. "It means you need to be out faster. They want the keys on the 15th. No delays." "I understand," I said, but the offer Henderson sent over was not just a pile of money, it was a trap. Buried in the legalese of the purchase agreement were specific clauses I had insisted on. First, there was a strict time is of the essence clause. If the sellers delayed closing for any reason, there was a massive daily penalty fee. This ensured my mother couldn't get sentimental or lazy at the last minute. Second, there was a specific performance clause. Once they signed, they could not back out. If they tried to cancel the sale because they found a higher offer, HollowCrest could sue them to force the sale. Third, and most importantly, there was a clause regarding possession and occupancy. It stated that the buyer accepted the property subject to existing tenancies until the date of closing, but required the sellers to vacate completely. It was a subtle distinction. It meant that I, the tenant, was a recognized entity in the paperwork, even if they didn't read it closely enough to realize the buyer was also the tenant. They signed it electronically that afternoon. My phone buzzed with a notification from Henderson. Contracts executed. We are in escrow. I sat there at the dining table, looking at my family. Marlo was looking at clothes online. Tessa was texting. My mother was pouring herself a glass of wine, celebrating her victory. "I cannot believe we pulled it off," she said, raising her glass. "The house is sold. We are free." I looked at her and felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Pity, no. Anger that had burned off long ago. It was just clarity. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. I opened my banking app. It was the first of the month. I transferred $500 to Gail Monroe. "I just sent you the rent, Mom," I said. She glanced at her phone. "Received. You really should save that money. You are going to need a deposit for an apartment in 2 weeks." "I am saving," I said. "You would be surprised how much I save." "Well, make sure you pack your room," she said dismissively. "I don't want to leave any junk for the corporate people to clean up." "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not leaving anything behind." I went upstairs to my room. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal for the closing attorney. I saw the transaction pending. I saw the wire transfer instructions for the remaining balance of the purchase price, $360,000, that would leave my accounts and land in the escrow account next week. It was a surreal feeling. I was downstairs. The daughter who was being evicted. I was upstairs. The CEO of the company buying the building. I looked at the walls. I touched the windowsill. This house held so many bad memories. But it was also mine. I had paid for it in tears, in silence, and in literal currency. I wasn't stealing it from them. That was the thought that kept me steady when the guilt tried to creep in. I wasn't swindling them. I was paying them fair market value. I was giving them exactly what they asked for. They wanted to sell the house, fine. I bought it. They just assumed that because I was Riley, I couldn't possibly be the one sitting on the other side of the table. They assumed I was weak. They assumed I was poor. They assumed I was stupid. Those assumptions were the vulnerabilities in their firewall, and I had just walked right through them. I lay down on my bed. The house was quiet. In 2 weeks, the deed would be recorded. The title would transfer from Warren and Gail Monroe to HollowCrest Holdings, LLC, and then the eviction notice would be served. But not to me. My mother thought she was the chess master. She didn't realize she had already been checkmated 3 moves ago. She was just waiting for the king to fall. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in years. The purchase was locked. The twist was set. Now, I just had to wait out the clock. The silence that followed their departure was not peaceful. It was tactical. My mother, Gail, had played her final hand in the psychological warfare of my eviction. The agreement with the buyers, my LLC, stated that the house needed to be vacant by the 15th. But on the morning of the 2nd, barely 24 hours after the contract was signed, I woke up to the sound of car doors slamming. I looked out my window. The driveway was empty. The rental SUV was gone. They hadn't told me they were leaving early. There was no goodbye. There was no good luck. There was simply a vacuum where a family used to be. They had packed their essential clothes, their jewelry, and the few sentimental items my mother deemed worthy of the new Florida condo, and they had vanished. The message was clear. They were forcing me into a panic. By abandoning the house 2 weeks early, they were telling me, "You are alone. You are unsupported. Figure it out or rot." They expected me to spend the next 14 days frantically packing boxes, crying on the floor, and scrambling to find a studio apartment I could afford. They wanted me to feel the crushing weight of my own displacement. They had no idea that the weight I was feeling was the heft of a closing binder. I did not panic. I did not cry. I walked into the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. I wasn't the frantic daughter being left behind. I was the project manager of a hostile takeover. The house was eerie. They had left behind furniture they didn't want to pay to ship the old sofa, the heavy dining table, the bookshelf in the den. It gave the place a feeling of suspended animation, like a museum exhibit of a suburban life that had abruptly ended. For the next 10 days, I lived in a state of high-functioning dissociation. I went to work at Beacon Sage, I monitored network traffic, and I came home to a house that was legally in limbo. But inside my head, a countdown clock was ticking. T-minus 10 days to closing. I received the settlement statement from the title company. It was a dense grid of numbers. Credits to the seller, debits to the buyer, prorated taxes, recording fees. I scrutinized every line. I saw the payout figure that would go to my parents. It was a staggering amount of money. Seeing it in black and white made my stomach tighten. I was about to hand them the life savings I had scraped together over 7 years of graveyard shifts and missed vacations. I was handing them their freedom, but I was buying mine. T-minus 3 days. I was in the kitchen, packing up my things, which was part of the charade. In case a neighbor looked in the window when I remembered the argument from the night before they left. It had been late. I was in my room, but the vents in this house carried sound like a copper wire. Marlo had been in the hallway, hissing at my mother. "I want $5,000 now," Marlo had demanded. "I found the listing agent. I staged the living room. You promised me a cut." "You get nothing until the check clears," my mother had snapped back. "We have to pay off the mortgage, pay the commissions, pay for the moving truck. The money is already allocated. Marlo, the Florida down payment took a huge chunk. I don't care about your Florida condo." Marlo had raised her voice. "I have credit card bills. You said if we sold the house, I would get a reset. You owe me." "I owe you nothing." It was a revelation. They hadn't even received the wire transfer yet, and they were already cannibalizing each other. They had spent the money in their heads. They had already allocated every cent to their new, shiny life, leaving no margin for error. That was good. Desperation makes people sloppy. It meant they wouldn't ask questions at the closing table. They would just want the check. Closing day, the 15th of the month, arrived with a gray, overcast sky. I did not go to the law office. I couldn't. Hollowcrest Holdings, LLC was represented by Mr. Henderson. If I walked into that room, the entire illusion would shatter, and the deal would implode. My mother would rather burn the house down than sell it to me. So I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks away from the attorney's office, watching the entrance like a stakeout. At 9 in the morning, I saw them. My parents pulled up in a rental car they must have flown back just for the signing. My mother was wearing a white pantsuit, looking like she was attending a coronation. My father trailed behind her, looking tired. My phone buzzed. It was Henderson. "Parties are present. Proceeding to sign." I closed my eyes. I imagined the room. I knew exactly what was happening. Mr. Henderson would slide the stack of documents across the mahogany table. He would be charming, professional, and utterly opaque. "Sign here," he would say. "This is the deed transferring title. This is the bill of sale for personal property left on premises." My mother wouldn't read it. She never read the fine print. She would be too busy calculating how quickly she could get to the bank. She would sign her name with a flourish. Gail Monroe. My father would hesitate. "Perhaps," he might ask. "So, who exactly is behind this Hollowcrest group?" And Henderson would have the answer we rehearsed. "They are a private equity holding firm based in the state capital. They value privacy. They are very excited about the asset." It wasn't a lie. I was private. I had equity, and I was very excited. 20 minutes passed. They felt like 20 years. I stared at the digital clock on my dashboard. 9:22, 9:23. My banking app sent a notification. Wire transfer initiated, $362,000. My breath hitched. That was it. The point of no return. The money was gone. I was liquidating my past to secure my future. 10 minutes later, I saw them walk out. My mother was beaming. She actually hugged the lawyer. She looked lighter, younger. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully purged the old house, the old debts, and the daughter who didn't fit into the picture. She was walking on air. My father looked relieved, his shoulders unhunched for the first time in years. They got into their car and drove away. They didn't drive by the house. They didn't come to check if I had actually moved out. They didn't care. They had the money. I was someone else's problem now. My phone buzzed again. Henderson, deed is signed. Keys are in my possession. Congratulations. Ms. Cruz, you are the owner of record. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob, but my eyes were dry. I started the car and drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. The brick was the same faded red. The shutters were the same peeling black. The oak tree in the front yard still dropped leaves on the windshield. But everything had changed. I walked to the front door. I didn't use my key. I reached into my bag and pulled out the new deadbolt set I had bought 3 days ago. I also pulled out a cordless drill. I didn't even go inside first. I stood on the porch and unscrewed the lock that my father had installed 10 years ago. I stripped the hardware from the door, leaving a raw, open hole. Then, I installed the new lock. It was a high-security smart lock, heavy and solid. I punched in a code, my code. The bolt slid home with a mechanical thud that felt like a gavel banging on a judge's desk. I opened the door and stepped inside. The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of ownership. I walked through the rooms. I went to the kitchen. I opened the drawer where my mother kept the utility bills. I took them out and shredded them. I had already called the power company, the water department, and the internet provider that morning. The accounts were no longer in the name of Warren Monroe. They were billed to Hollowcrest Holdings. I went to the living room window. I peeled back the curtain and looked at the corners of the ceiling. I pulled a stepladder from the closet and mounted 3 small, wireless cameras, one facing the driveway, one facing the front door, one facing the back patio. I linked them to my phone. The feed went live. I could see the perimeter of my fortress. Then, I did something I had never been allowed to do. I walked to the thermostat. My mother kept it at 78 degrees in the summer to save money. It was sweltering. I pressed the button. I dialed it down to 72. I heard the AC unit kick on, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Cool air began to push through the vents. I stood in the center of the living room. The furniture they had left behind looked sad and small. The ghost of their presence was fading with every second that ticked by. They were gone. They were currently on a plane or driving down the interstate, laughing, thinking they had pulled off the great escape. They thought they had left me homeless. They thought they had discarded me. They didn't know that I was standing in the center of their former kingdom, holding the deed, cooling the air, and watching the driveway through a camera lens. I looked at the spot where the family portrait used to hang. The nail hole was still there. "You didn't sell the house, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "You just sold your leverage." I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a bottle of cheap champagne I had hidden in the vegetable crisper. I popped the cork. It was loud in the empty house. I drank straight from the bottle. It tasted like cold grapes and iron. The house was mine. The game had flipped, and the clock was now ticking toward the moment they would realize exactly what they had done. The first thing I did was fix the kitchen faucet. For 12 years, that faucet had dripped. It was a rhythmic, torture device sound, plip, 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 that echoed through the house at night. My father always said he would get around to it, but he never did. He would wrap a rag around the handle or jiggle it until the tempo slowed. But the leak remained. It was a monument to the Monroe family philosophy: ignore the problem until it becomes background noise. 2 days after I changed the locks, I called a plumber. He arrived at 8 in the morning. He spent 40 minutes under the sink. He charged me $215, and just like that, the silence in the kitchen was absolute. I stood there for a long time, turning the handle on and off, marveling at how easy it was to repair something when you actually cared about the infrastructure of your life. The next 6 months were a slow, deliberate exorcism of their presence. I didn't gut the house. I couldn't afford a full remodel yet. And honestly, the structure wasn't the problem. The problem was the energy. I started painting. I covered the sterile, landlord beige walls of the living room with a warm, deep charcoal. It made the room feel smaller, safer, like a cocoon rather than a display case. I bought a sofa. It was a sectional, upholstered in a soft navy blue velvet. My mother would have hated it. She would have said it collected dust, or that it was too dark. She believed furniture was for looking at, not for sitting on. I sat on that couch every night. I ate pizza on that couch. I put my feet up on the coffee table, a rustic oak piece I found at an estate sale, and I didn't use a coaster. These were small rebellions, but they felt like revolutions. For the first time in 29 years, I invited people over. It was a Friday night in November. I invited 3 colleagues from Beacon Sage Sarah, who worked in compliance, and 2 guys from my threat detection team, David and Marcus. We ordered Thai food. We opened 2 bottles of wine. I remember standing in the kitchen, arranging spring rolls on a platter, and feeling a spike of phantom panic. My muscles tensed up, waiting for the sound of the garage door opening. I was waiting for my mother to storm in and ask why there were strangers in her house, why we were making noise, why I hadn't asked for permission. Then I looked at the deed, which I had framed and hung inside the pantry door where only I could see it. The panic dissolved. We ate at the dining table. We laughed. Marcus spilled a little bit of curry on the placemat, and instead of freezing in terror, I just handed him a napkin and said it was fine. And it was fine. The house didn't collapse. The world didn't end. The walls absorbed the laughter instead of reflecting the tension. That night, after they left, I loaded the dishwasher and realized that I wasn't just squatting in a building, I was making a home. My work was still stressful. The cybersecurity landscape doesn't sleep. And the holiday season always brings a spike in phishing attacks and retail breaches. I was working long hours, often staring at code until my eyes blurred. But the difference was the sleep. I used to sleep with one ear open, listening for the sound of arguments or the passive-aggressive slamming of cabinet doors. Now the house was silent unless I chose to make noise. I slept deeply, waking up only when my alarm went off, not when my anxiety spiked. In all that time, the silence from my family was deafening. They had been gone for 1 month, then 2, then 3. I checked my phone on Thanksgiving. Nothing. I checked it on Christmas. Nothing. Not a text, not a card, not a generic Facebook message. It confirmed everything I had suspected, but was afraid to admit. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an appliance they had sold. You don't call your old toaster to see how it is doing. You don't send a Christmas card to the car you traded in. They had cashed out, and I was part of the transaction history. I knew, vaguely, where they were. My mother couldn't help but post on social media. Although she had blocked me, I used a burner account to check in occasionally. They were in Florida. I saw photos of them on a boat. I saw Marlo holding a cocktail by a pool. I saw my father looking sunburned and slightly bewildered in a golf cart. They looked like they were burning through cash at a rate that would make a venture capitalist sweat. But they didn't reach out to me. And that silence was the final permission I needed to stop feeling guilty. Then came the 6-month mark. It was a Tuesday in early spring. I was working from home, sitting at the dining table with my laptop, analyzing a suspicious packet trace from a client in Europe. The windows were open, letting in the smell of blooming dogwood. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, expecting a 2-factor authentication code or a message from my boss. The name on the screen made my blood run cold for a split second, a reflex I hadn't fully unlearned. Mom. I stared at it. I didn't pick up. The phone vibrated for 30 seconds, dancing across the wood grain, and then went still. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Why are you still there?" I frowned. I read it again. "Why are you still there?" How did she know I was there? I stood up and walked to the window, peering out through the blinds. The street was empty. Then I saw it. Mrs. Higgins. the neighbor across the street, was out walking her poodle, Mrs. Higgins, who was the neighborhood gossip and had been my mother's primary source of information for 20 years. She must have seen my car. She must have seen the lights on at night. Mrs. Higgins must have called Gail Monroe in Florida and said, "It is so nice that the new owners let Riley stay in the house to watch it for them." Or perhaps, "It is strange that the house sold, but Riley is the only one coming and going." I looked back at the phone. Another message popped up. "The neighbors say your car is in the driveway. The house closed 6 months ago. The new company was supposed to take possession. Did they let you stay?" I felt a bubble of laughter rise in my throat. It started as a chuckle and turned into a full, chest-shaking laugh. She thought I was a squatter. She thought that Hollow Crest Holdings LLC, the big, bad corporate entity, had been too lazy or too incompetent to kick me out. She thought I was living on borrowed time, taking advantage of a clerical error. She had no idea that she was texting the CEO of Hollow Crest Holdings. The phone rang again. She was calling. She wanted answers. She probably wanted to scream at me for embarrassing her. Or maybe she was worried that if I was still there, somehow the sale would be reversed and she would lose her money. I didn't answer. I let it ring. If I answered, I would have to explain. If I explained, the game would end over the phone. And that wasn't how this story was supposed to end. I didn't want to tell her. I wanted to show her. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. For the next 3 days, she texted. The tone shifted from confusion to anger, and then to a strange, greedy curiosity. "Riley, answer me. If you are squatting, you are going to get arrested. Did the company offer you a lease? How much are you paying?" And then, the one that gave it away. "We are coming up this weekend to sort this out. We have business in the city anyway." Business in the city was code for, "We are running out of money and we need to see if we can extract something from this situation." Or perhaps they were just terrified that their fraud selling a house with a clouded title was about to catch up to them, and my presence was the red flag. I didn't reply. I just marked the date on my mental calendar. Saturday. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It had rained overnight, and the pavement was slick and black. I woke up early. I didn't dress in my pajamas. I put on a pair of tailored black trousers and a crisp white silk blouse. I put on my shoes. I wasn't dressing for a lazy Saturday. I was dressing for a board meeting. I made coffee. I sat in the living room, facing the window. I had the camera feed open on my iPad, propped up on the coffee table. At 10:15 in the morning, a car turned onto the street. It wasn't the rental SUV from 6 months ago. It was a brand new, silver luxury sedan, but it looked dirty, unwashed, with Florida plates. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was the feeling you get right before you step onto a stage. The car slowed down. It crawled past the house, as if they were scoping it out. Then, it reversed and pulled into the driveway. I watched them on the camera screen. My mother got out first. She looked tan, but it was a harsh, leathery tan. Her hair was lighter, bleached by the sun, but her roots were showing. She looked expensive but frayed, like a designer handbag that had been dragged across concrete. My father got out of the driver's side. He looked heavier. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight. He looked at the house with a mixture of dread and confusion. Marlo was with them. Of course she was. She climbed out of the back seat, wearing oversized sunglasses, looking at her phone as if the world bored her. Tessa wasn't there. She was probably still sleeping in whatever condo they were renting, or maybe she had finally stayed behind. They stood in the driveway for a moment. My mother pointed at the flower beds. I had planted hydrangeas. She hated hydrangeas. She was gesturing aggressively, probably saying, "Look at that. She thinks she owns the place." They walked up the path. I heard their footsteps on the porch, heavy, proprietary. They walked like they still owned the concrete beneath their feet. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blouse. The doorbell rang. Ding dong. It was the same sound it had always been, but this time, it didn't signal a command for me to run and serve. It signaled the start of the final act. I walked to the door. The hallway seemed to stretch out, the distance between the old Riley and the new Riley measuring exactly 15 feet. I reached for the handle. I didn't look through the peephole. I knew exactly what was on the other side. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt with a solid click. I turned the handle. I pulled the door open. My mother was already mid-sentence, her mouth open to launch an accusation. "Riley, what on earth do you think you are?" She stopped. She looked at me. Then she looked past me, into the foyer. She saw the charcoal walls. She saw the new art. She saw the velvet sofa in the distance. She smelled the coffee and the lemon oil, not the stale air of a house waiting to die. I leaned against the doorframe, blocking their entry, not with my body, but with my presence. "Hello, Mother," I said. "You should have called before stopping by. It is rude to show up unannounced at someone else's house." My mother stepped across the threshold, and the air in the room shifted instantly. It was as if a storm front had moved indoors. She did not wipe her feet. She did not say hello. She walked in with the aggressive confidence of a health inspector looking for a violation. She stopped in the center of the foyer, her eyes darting around the space. She looked at the charcoal walls, scanning for the beige paint she had chosen 15 years ago. She looked at the abstract art hanging where her generic floral prints used to be. She looked at the floor, which I had deep cleaned and polished until the oak looked new again. "It is dark," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the high ceiling. "Why did you paint it this color? It makes the room look small." She wasn't asking me. She was critiquing the property, assuming her opinion still held the weight of law. Marlo followed her in. My sister was wearing sunglasses which she pushed up onto her head as she entered. She drifted past me, the scent of expensive vanilla perfume trailing behind her. She walked straight to the navy velvet sectional in the living room. She ran her hand along the back of it, her fingers testing the fabric. It was a gesture I knew well. She was checking the grain, checking the quality. She wanted to know if it was cheap knockoff furniture or the real thing. Her hand paused. She felt the density of the upholstery. She looked at the label on the throw pillow. "This is custom," Marlo said, her voice tight. She turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing. "This is a West Elm piece, or maybe Pottery Barn. Since when do you shop there?" Tessa brought up the rear. I hadn't seen her get out of the car initially, but there she was, looking disheveled and tired. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, her mouth slightly open. "Whoa," Tessa said. "Ideally, we should have kept the TV. Mom, look at the size of that screen." They were treating my home like a showroom. They were treating me like a squatter who had won a scratch-off ticket. "Where is the old recliner?" my father asked, finally stepping fully inside. He looked lost without his familiar props. "I donated it," I said calmly. "It was broken." My mother spun around. The inspection was over. The interrogation was beginning. Her face was flushed, a combination of the travel, the heat, and the rising indignation that I had dared to change her house. "What is going on here, Riley?" she demanded. Her voice dropped to that low, dangerous register she used when she wanted to intimidate. "The neighbors said you were still here. I thought maybe the new owners were letting you rent a room. But this..." She waved a hand at the furniture, at the art, at the new light fixtures. "This isn't renting. You are redecorating. Where did you get the money for this? Did you steal a credit card? Did you take out a loan in your father's name?" The accusation hung in the air, gross and heavy. Even after 6 months of silence, her first instinct was to assume I was a criminal or a parasite. "I have a job, Mom," I said. "I work." "You fix computers," she scoffed. "You don't make this kind of money." I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured toward the living room seating area. "Please," I said, my voice polite but distant. "Sit down. Can I get anyone a glass of water?" It was the tone you use for a door-to-door salesman you're trying to get rid of, or a distant acquaintance you have no interest in reconnecting with. It wasn't the tone of a daughter. They hesitated. The power dynamic wobbled. Usually, they told me to sit. They told me to stand. Now, I was directing them. My mother sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, perching as if she expected it to bite her. Marlo sat on the sofa, crossing her legs, looking bored but alert. Tessa flopped down next to her. My father remained standing near the fireplace, looking at the empty spot on the mantel where his bowling trophies used to be. "We are not here for a social call," my mother said, tightening her grip on her purse. "We are here because we are worried. We sold this house to a company, Hollow Crest Holdings. If they find out you are here changing the paint and buying furniture, they are going to sue us. They could freeze the sale funds. Do you understand how dangerous this is?" "The sale funds," I repeated. "Do you still have them?" The room went quiet. Marlo looked at her fingernails. Tessa bit her lip. My father looked at the floor. "That is none of your business," my mother snapped, but her eyes darted away. "The point is, you need to pack this stuff up. We need to call the company and explain. Maybe we can say you were just confused." I looked at them. They were terrified. They weren't terrified for me. They were terrified that my presence would somehow reach back into their bank accounts and claw back the money they had already spent. "You don't need to call the company," I said. "I absolutely do," my mother cried. "I am not going to let your stupidity ruin our fresh start." "You don't need to call them," I said again, louder this time, "because they are already here." My mother looked around the room, confused. "What is a representative coming?" "No," I said. "I am the representative." I walked over to the coffee table. I had placed a simple manila folder there before I opened the door. I picked it up. "You are sitting in my house," I said. My mother stared at me. Then, she let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a bark of incredulity. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "Stop playing games. Riley, it is not funny." "I am not joking," I said. I opened the folder. I pulled out a single document. It was a copy of the recorded deed. It had the county seal stamped in blue ink on the bottom right corner. It listed the grantor as Warren and Gail Monroe, and the grantee as Hollow Crest Holdings, LLC. I placed it on the table in front of them, but I didn't let go of the corner. "Hollow Crest Holdings is a single-member limited liability company," I said, my voice steady. "I am the single member. I am the CEO. I am the sole signatory." I looked at my father. "Dad," I said, "look at the signature line for the buyer." He stepped forward, squinting. He reached into his pocket for his reading glasses. He put them on and leaned over the table. He looked at the document. He looked at the signature page attached to the back. There, in black and white, was the signature of the authorized representative for the buyer. It wasn't a scribble. It was my name, Riley Cruz. My father's face went the color of ash. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his mouth moving but making no sound. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been driving on the wrong side of the road for 6 months. "You," he whispered, "you bought it?" "I bought it," I confirmed. "I paid asking price. I paid cash. The $362,000 that was wired to your account, that came from my savings and my financing." "That's impossible," Marlo said, her voice rising in pitch. "You make $40,000 a year. You drive a Honda." "I make $180,000 a year plus bonuses," I corrected her, enjoying the look of shock that slapped her across the face. "And I drive a Honda because I was saving money to buy a house. This house." My mother snatched the paper from the table. She read it. Her hands were shaking. The paper rattled. She read the LLC name. She read my name. She looked at the date. She dropped the paper as if it were burning her skin. "You?" She choked on the word. "You tricked us." "I didn't trick anyone," I said. "I made an offer. You accepted it. You signed the papers. You were so desperate to get the money and get rid of me that you didn't even check who was signing the checks." My mother stood up. She was trembling. For a second, I thought she might hit me. But then, I saw the gears turning in her head. I saw the anger transmute into something slimier, something more desperate. She looked at the new furniture again, but this time, she didn't look at it with judgment. She looked at it with hunger. She looked at me, and her expression softened into a grotesque parody of maternal affection. "Riley," she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Oh, my God. You did this for us to keep the house in the family." "No," I said. "I did it to keep the house for myself." She ignored me. She stepped closer, reaching out a hand to touch my arm. I took a step back. "This changes everything," she said, her eyes gleaming. "We were so worried. Florida isn't working out. Honey, the condo has mold. The fees are too high. Your father misses the garden." She looked at my father. "Warren, tell her how much you miss the garden." My father didn't speak. He was staring at me with a look I had never seen before. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. He realized that the daughter he had ignored for 29 years was the only person in the room with any power. "We can move back," my mother said, her voice gaining speed. "It is perfect. You have plenty of room. We can take the master bedroom back, and you can stay in your room, or take the guest room. We can help you with the mortgage. Well, not right away, because money is tight. But eventually," she was rewriting reality in real time. She was trying to recolonize my life. "No," I said. "What do you mean?" "No," she asked, her smile faltering. "We are your family. We are struggling. Riley, the money went faster than we thought. We made some bad investments. We need a place to stay." "You have a place to stay," I said. "In Florida, or wherever you go next." "You can't be serious," Marlowe chimed in, standing up. "You have a 3-bedroom house all to yourself. That is selfish. We are family. You owe us." "I owe you?" I asked. I felt a cold, hard laughter bubbling in my chest. "I paid rent for 5 years. I paid for my own college. I paid for my own car. And then, I paid you $362,000 for this house. I don't owe you a single penny. We raised you," my mother screamed, the mask falling off completely. "We gave you life. You ungrateful little brat. If you have money, you share it with family. That is how it works." "Is it?" I asked. "Because when I was living here, paying rent, you told me I was a burden. You told me I had 1 month to get out. You didn't care where I went. You didn't care if I slept in my car." "That was different," she yelled. "We were selling the house. And now I have bought it," I said. "So the rules apply to you." "I am your mother," she shrieked. "You cannot throw me out of my own home." "It is not your home," I said quietly. "Read the deed." My mother lunged forward. "I will sue you. I will tell everyone what you did. I will tell them you stole this house from under us. I will make sure you have no friends left in this town." "Go ahead," I said. Tell them you sold your house to a shell company because you were trying to hide a title defect from a regular buyer. Tell them you didn't read the contract. Tell them you spent the money in 6 months." I walked to the front door. I pulled it open wide. The damp air from the street rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt. "You have 5 minutes to leave," I said. "If you are not off my property in 5 minutes, I will call the police and have you trespassed." "You wouldn't dare," my mother hissed. "Try me," I said. "And if you want to argue about the legality of the sale, you can contact my attorney, Mr. Henderson. I believe you have his number. He is the one who handed you the check." My mother stared at me. She looked at the open door. She looked at the luxurious living room she could no longer claim. She looked at the daughter she had tried to erase, who had instead rewritten the entire narrative. She didn't move toward the door. She stood her ground, her face twisting into a mask of pure, venomous spite. "You think you have won," she spat, "but you are nothing without us. You are just a sad, lonely girl in a big empty house." "Maybe," I said, "but it is my house." I looked at my watch. 4 minutes, I said. When my family walked off my porch that rainy Saturday, they did not retreat. They simply regrouped. They had realized that a frontal assault on the house was impossible because I held the high ground of the deed. So, like any losing army with no morals, they decided to scorch the earth. If they could not take the property back, they would try to burn down my reputation, my career, and my sanity. It started with the flying monkeys, in psychological terms. Flying monkeys are the enablers that a narcissist recruits to do their dirty work. In my case, it was my Aunt Linda and a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Sunday afternoon. My phone began to ring. It wasn't my mother this time. It was Linda. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text that was a paragraph long. Riley, your mother is distraught. I cannot believe you would throw your own parents out on the street. Blood is thicker than water. You need to make this right. They are staying in a motel because of you. Have you no shame? I read the message while drinking tea in my living room. The old Riley would have typed out a frantic defense. The old Riley would have explained about the rent, the lies, the secret sale, and the fact that they had hundreds of thousands of dollars in their bank account. But I knew that explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was a waste of bandwidth. I replied with the sentence I had prepared with Mr. Henderson. Please submit all inquiries regarding this matter in writing to my attorney. I blocked the number. Then came Cousin Mike. He sent a Facebook message calling me a snake and demanding I apologize to my father. I replied, please submit all inquiries regarding this matter in writing to my attorney. I blocked him too. They were trying to shame me into submission. They were banking on the idea that I was desperate for their approval. They didn't realize that their approval was a currency that had been devalued to zero. Then, the war moved to the digital town square. I had not removed myself from the extended family group chat yet. I wanted the intelligence. I wanted to see their movements. On Monday morning, Marlo dropped the bomb. She posted a long, rambling message in the Monroe Family Updates chat, which included aunts, uncles, and second cousins, family, just asking for prayers today. We are dealing with a shocking betrayal. Riley tricked Mom and Dad into signing over the Cedar Hollow house. She took advantage of Dad's failing eyesight and Mom's trust. We are looking into legal options to stop this elder abuse, but right now, we are effectively homeless. It is heartbreaking when family turns on family for money. Elder abuse. She had actually used the phrase elder abuse. My father was 58 and played golf twice a week. My mother was 55 and did Pilates. I sat at my desk at home, my hand hovering over the keyboard. The urge to upload the screenshots of the sale listing, the emails from the agent, and the text messages where my mother called me a nuisance was overwhelming. I wanted to scream the truth. But I stopped. Engaging with the lie validates the lie. It turns it into a debate. This wasn't a debate. It was a legal reality. I took a screenshot of Marlo's message. I saved it to a folder named Defamation Evidence. Then, I left the group chat. That afternoon, the battlefield shifted again. This time, they crossed a line that I didn't think even they would touch. They went after my livelihood. I was at the Beacon Sage office for a quarterly review. I was sitting in my cubicle, analyzing a firewall log, when the internal chat pinged. It was the receptionist at the front desk, Riley. There is a woman on line 1. She is escalating. She says she is your mother. She is demanding to speak to your supervisor. She says it is an emergency regarding your mental stability. My stomach dropped through the floor. This was it. The nightmare scenario. My professional life was the one place where I was respected, where I was competent, where I wasn't just the Monroe family doormat. If she ruined this, if she made me look unstable or dramatic to my bosses, I would lose everything. For a second, I felt like the little girl hiding in the pantry. But then, my training kicked in. Beacon Sage is a cybersecurity firm. We handle sensitive data for banks and hospitals. Social engineering people calling up and pretending to be panicked to get information or access is the #1 threat vector we train against. I type back to the receptionist. Do not transfer her. Initiate Protocol 7. Harassment and external threat. Protocol 7 was designed for angry ex-spouses or stalkers trying to compromise an employee. It meant the call wasn't transferred to me or my boss. It was transferred to the Legal and Security Compliance Officer, and the call was recorded for evidence. I walked to the security office. I stood outside the glass wall and watched the security director. A man named Jim Serra was the loan officer. Listen to the phone. He wasn't nodding sympathetically. He was typing. My mother thought she was calling a regular office where she could bully a secretary. She didn't realize she was calling a fortress that viewed her hysteria as a security breach. Jim hung up and waved me in. "Is that your mother?" he asked, his face neutral. "Yes," I said. "I am currently in a property dispute with her. She is trying to leverage my employment to pressure me." Jim played a snippet of the recording. "She is a thief. She stole our house. She is using company resources to commit fraud. You need to fire her before she steals from you too." It was my mother's voice, shrill and ugly. Hearing it in this professional, sterile environment was jarring. "I can assure you," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that my finances and the property purchase are entirely legal and documented. I can provide the deed if necessary." Jim raised a hand. "Riley, you are a senior analyst with top-level clearance. We vetted you. We know you are not a fraud. This," he gestured to the phone, "this is harassment. We have flagged her number. If she calls again, it goes straight to legal. You are safe here." I nearly cried. I had expected to be reprimanded. Instead, the system worked. My mother's attempt to destroy me had only created an official corporate record of her instability. That evening, I sent the cease and desist letter. Mr. Henderson drafted it. It was brutal in its simplicity. It stated that Gail, Warren, Marlowe, and Tessa Monroe were to have no contact with Riley Cruz, no calls, no texts, no workplace interference. It explicitly mentioned the defamation in the group chat and the attempted interference with my employment. It ended with a clear threat any further contact would result in a restraining order and a civil suit for damages. We sent it via email and certified mail to the address on their driver's licenses, which, ironically, was still my house, and to the email addresses they used for the closing. The reaction was immediate silence. The legal wall had gone up. They realized that I wasn't playing family anymore. I was treating them like strangers. And to a narcissist, being treated like a stranger being ignored legally is worse than being hated. But silence has a texture. This silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of water receding before a tsunami. 2 days later, the water rushed back in. But in the form of the weakest link, I came home from work to find Tessa sitting on the curb at the end of my driveway. She wasn't allowed on the property. And technically, the curb was public easement. She knew exactly how far she could push. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy. She was wearing a hoodie that looked 3 days old. When she saw my car, she stood up. She didn't scream. She just looked pathetic. I rolled down the window but kept the car in drive. "What do you want?" "Tessa." "I need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Mom is losing it. She is obsessed with destroying you. It is scary in the hotel." "Riley?" "I am sorry to hear that," I said, "but I cannot help you. I need tuition money," she blurted out. "The semester starts in 3 weeks. Mom said she was going to pay it from the house money, but now she says the accounts are frozen or tied up or something. She's lying. Riley, I know she spent it, but I can't drop out." She walked closer to the car. "You have the house," she said. "You have that big salary. Just give me $5,000. For the tuition, please. I am your sister. I didn't do anything." I looked at her. Tessa, who had laughed when Mom told me to get out in a month. Tessa, who had smirked when I was excluded from dinner conversations. "I didn't do anything," she repeated. "Exactly," I said. "You did nothing. You watched them erase me for years, and you enjoyed the extra space. You enjoyed the attention." I was a kid. "You are 22, I said. "You are an adult. And here's the thing. Tessa, you are not asking for help. You are demanding a share. You think because I have money, you are entitled to it." "You have it," she snapped. the pathetic mask slipping to reveal the Monroe entitlement underneath. "Why are you being such a bitch? Just write the check and I will go away." "No," I said. I rolled up the window. "If you don't give it to me, I will tell everyone you hit me." She screamed at the glass. I pointed to the dash cam on my windshield. I pointed to the security camera on the oak tree above us. Tessa froze. She looked at the camera. She looked at me. She turned around and ran down the street to where her car was parked around the corner. I drove into my garage and closed the door. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of severing the limb. That night, I called Mr. Henderson to report the incident. "They are getting desperate," Henderson said. "The tuition request? That is interesting. If they spent the sale proceeds that quickly, they are in financial freefall. Desperate people do irrational things. Riley, I want you to check your credit." "My credit?" I asked. "Why?" "Because they know your social security number," he said. "They raised you. They have your birth certificate, and they feel entitled to your resources. Just check it." I hung up and opened my laptop. I logged into the credit monitoring service I used, the one that usually showed a boring, flat line of excellent history. I clicked on Recent Inquiries. My breath stopped in my throat. There, at the top of the list, was a hard inquiry from a payday loan provider online, dated 2 days ago. I scrolled down. An inquiry for a high-limit credit card, dated yesterday. And then, the smoking gun. A notification of a new account opening. A personal loan for $20,000, approved and dispersed. The address on the file was a P.O. box in Florida. The world tilted on its axis. They weren't just trying to bully me. They weren't just trying to ruin my reputation. They were actively stealing my identity. They had decided that since they couldn't live in my house, they would live inside my credit score. They viewed me as a resource to be harvested. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that it bypassed pain and went straight to a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't family. This was a parasitic infection. I looked at the loan details. My father's name was listed as a co-signer on one of the applications, using my credentials as the primary. They had used my old bedroom to find old tax returns I might have missed. Or maybe they just remembered the numbers. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that they had just handed me the weapon that would end them. I didn't scream. I picked up the phone and called the credit bureau's fraud department. "I need to report identity theft," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a machine. "I need to freeze all 3 bureaus immediately, and I need to flag specific transactions as fraudulent." "Do you know the perpetrator?" the agent asked. I looked at the names on the inquiries. I looked at the history of the people who had raised me, who had sat at dinner with me, who had claimed to love me while they sharpened their knives. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly who they are." I froze the credit. I changed every password to a random string of alphanumeric chaos. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything, linked to a hardware key that I wore around my neck. Then, I sat back. By freezing the credit and flagging the fraud, I had just armed a bomb in their laps. They had taken the money. They had likely spent it. When the bank realized the loan was fraudulent, they wouldn't just ask for the money back. They would involve the authorities. My family wanted to live on my name. Fine. I would make sure my name was the heaviest thing they ever tried to carry. I went to the window and looked out at the dark street. "You wanted to be part of my life," I whispered. "Now you are part of my police report." Revenge is often depicted as a heat-of-the-moment act, a glass thrown against a wall or a slap across a face. But true revenge, the kind that reshapes reality, is boring. It is quiet. It is administrative. It happens in the silence of a lawyer's conference room and the hum of a server farm. For the next 48 hours, I did not sleep. I operated in a state of cold, clinical focus. I treated the identity theft not as a family betrayal, but as a hostile intrusion into a secure network. I was no longer Riley the daughter. I was Riley the senior analyst, and I was hunting a hacker. I sat with Mr. Henderson, my attorney, and we built a dossier that was heavier than a brick. We didn't just look at the credit report. We looked at the metadata. Look at this, I said, pointing to the screen of my laptop. The application for the $20,000 personal loan was submitted electronically at 2:14 in the morning on Tuesday. Henderson adjusted his glasses. Okay, and I traced the IP address, I said. It resolves to a static IP assigned to the guest network of the Regency Suites Hotel on the north side of the city. Room 304 logged into the network at 2 o'clock. That is where they are staying, Henderson said. Exactly. And the email address used to register the loan account Riley Cruz, finances gmail.com. I typed a few commands. I ran a recovery attempt on that email. The recovery phone number associated with it ends in 4492. Henderson looked at his file. That is your mother's cell phone number. They were lazy, I said, leaning back. They were arrogant. They thought that because they knew my social security number, they owned my identity. They didn't bother to mask their digital footprints because they didn't think I would look. The twist was not just that they had stolen from me. It was what they had done with the money. As we dug deeper, pulling the transaction logs that the bank had flagged, the picture became clear. They hadn't used the loan for tuition. They hadn't used it for food. They had used my credit profile to secure a lease on a luxury apartment in a high-rise downtown. They had used my excellent credit score to bypass the security deposit. The $20,000 was sitting in a checking account they had opened in my name, intended to pay the rent for the next 6 months. They were building their new life on a foundation of my stolen identity. They were squatting in my credit history just like they had tried to squat in my house. If we report this as fraud, Henderson said slowly, the bank will claw back the funds, the lease will be voided, the landlord will evict them immediately for providing false financial information. I looked at him. Do it. Riley, he said, sounding cautious. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. This is grand larceny. This is wire fraud. If the police get involved, your parents, specifically your mother, could go to prison. They made a choice, I said. They chose to steal. I am just choosing to tell the truth. File the affidavits. We sent the packets out at noon. Identity theft affidavit. Dispute of liability. Unauthorized transaction report. I signed my name to every single page. With every signature. I felt a tether snapping. The reaction was not immediate. Bureaucracy takes time. For 2 days, there was silence. I went to work. I came home. I watered my hydrangeas. Then, the bomb went off. I was in my kitchen, making tea. When my phone rang, it was a number I didn't recognize, likely a burner or a payphone. Since I had blocked them all, I answered, "You ungrateful, vicious little witch." It was my mother. She wasn't screaming. She was screeching. It was a sound of pure, animalistic panic. "Hello, Mother," I said, taking a sip of tea. "I assume the bank called you?" "They froze the account," she yelled. "We were at the furniture store. The card was declined. They said the account is flagged for fraud investigation. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" "I imagine it was very embarrassing," I said. "It is usually embarrassing when you try to spend money that isn't yours." "You have to call them back," she demanded. "Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you authorized it. We signed the lease on the apartment. Riley. We move in on Monday. If that money isn't there, we lose the apartment." "I cannot do that," I said calmly. "Because I did not authorize it. That would be lying to a federal institution." "You are ruining this family," she screamed. "We will be on the street. We have nowhere to go. How can you do this to us? We are your flesh and blood." "You ruined this family," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You ruined it the day you looked at me and decided I was a resource to be harvested instead of a person to be loved. You ruined it when you sold my home out from under me. You ruined it when you stole my identity. I did it for us," she sobbed, switching tactics instantly from rage to martyrdom. "We needed a fresh start. We were going to pay it back eventually." "No, you weren't," I said. "You were going to bleed me dry until I had nothing left, and then you were going to blame me for being empty. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, a different number. I hesitated, then answered. Riley. The voice was quiet, broken. It was my father. Dad, I said. I didn't know, he said. His voice was trembling. I swear to God, Riley, I didn't know she opened the credit cards. I didn't know she used your name for the lease. You co-signed the application. Dad, I said. I saw the signature. She told me it was just paperwork, he whispered. She put the papers in front of me and told me to sign. She said she had worked it out with you. She said you wanted to help us get the apartment. I closed my eyes. It was pathetic, but it was also the truth. Warren Monroe had spent 30 years signing whatever Gail put in front of him to avoid a fight. He was an accomplice by cowardice. I am sorry, he said, and then he started to cry. It was a deep, racking sound. I am so sorry. Riley, I should have protected you. I should have stopped her. It was the first time in 29 years he had apologized to me. It was the first time he had acknowledged that I needed protection. I appreciate the apology, Dad, I said softly, but an apology doesn't fix a credit score, and it doesn't undo the last 6 months. What do we do? He asked. The police. The bank said they are filing a police report. I can stop the train, I said, but only if you agree to get off the tracks. Anything, he said. Please, meet me at my lawyer's office tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I said. Bring Mom, bring the girls, and bring every single piece of paper you have. The next morning, the conference room at Mr. Henderson's firm felt like a courtroom. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Henderson and a junior associate. My family sat on the other side. They looked like refugees from a war they had started. My mother was pale, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. Marlo looked furious. Her arms crossed so tight her knuckles were white. Tessa was just crying silently. My father looked at his hands. Henderson slid a document across the table. It was thick. This, Henderson said, is a global settlement and separation agreement. My mother looked at it. What does this mean? It means, I said, speaking for the first time, that I am offering you a lifeline. If you sign this, I will withdraw the criminal complaint. I will tell the bank that while the transaction was unauthorized, I am declining to press charges for the time being, provided the funds are returned immediately. And if we don't sign, Marlo asked, her voice dripping with venom, then I let the process play out. I said, the police verify the IP addresses. They verify the signatures. Mom goes to prison for identity theft and wire fraud. Dad probably goes too as a co-conspirator. And you and Tessa are left with nothing. Marlo slammed her hand on the table. This is blackmail. You are coercing us. We could sue you for this. Henderson laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Ms. Monroe, he said, please sue us. File a lawsuit. Do you know what happens in a lawsuit? It is called discovery. We would depose you. We would subpoena your bank records. We would subpoena your text messages. We would lay out every single lie, every single stolen dollar, every single fraudulent act in open court. He leaned forward. A lawsuit would not save you, Henderson said. It would memorialize your crimes. Marlo's mouth snapped shut. She looked at my mother. She realized there was no spin that could fix this. What are the terms? My father asked quietly. Total separation, I said. You return the $20,000 immediately. You vacate the apartment lease that is in my name. You sign a document admitting that the debt is yours, not mine, so I can clear my credit report. I paused. And you agree to a permanent no-contact order. You do not call me. You do not text me. You do not come to my house. You do not contact my employer. You disappear from my life, completely. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but not with sadness, with defeat. You are kicking us out of the family, she whispered. You are disowning your own mother. You disowned me when you sold my home, I said. I am just making the paperwork match the reality. I pushed a pen across the table. Sign it, I said. Or I call the detective back. My mother looked at the pen. She looked at my father. He gave a slight, imperceptible nod. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed. Gail Monroe. Then my father signed. Then Marlo. Then Tessa. Henderson took the document. He checked the signatures. He notarized it on the spot. It is done, he said. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I had my house. I had my name back. And for the first time in my life, I was the one walking out of the room while they sat there, wondering how they had lost a game they thought they were rigged to win. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was shining. The air smelled of spring. I took a deep breath, and my lungs filled with oxygen that felt cleaner than it ever had before. I checked my phone. I deleted their contact information. It was over. You might think that exposing the fraud and threatening them with prison would have been the end of it. You might think that sitting in a lawyer's office and watching them shrink under the weight of their own crimes would be the finale, but you would be wrong. Narcissists do not fade away quietly. When you back a narcissist into a corner, they do not surrender. They attack. They try to rewrite the narrative one last time. The ink on the fraud affidavits was barely dry when Gail Monroe decided to play her final desperate card. It was Saturday morning, 2 days after the confrontation about the credit cards. I was in the kitchen, organizing my spice rack, a small, mundane task that felt incredibly grounding when I saw the car pull up. It wasn't just their rental sedan this time. There was a second car, a pickup truck belonging to my Uncle Jerry, a man who had not spoken to me in 5 years but who was famous in the family for being loud, physically imposing, and fiercely loyal to my mother's version of reality. My mother got out of the car. She wasn't looking defeated like she had in the lawyer's office. She looked militant. She was marching up the driveway with the energy of a general reclaiming occupied territory. Uncle Jerry followed her, looking like a hired muscle, and my father trailed behind, looking like a man walking to his own execution. Marlo and Tessa stayed by the car, watching with the nervous anticipation of spectators at a coliseum. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to bully me out. I did not panic. I did not shake. I simply took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed Mr. Henderson's number. "We are live," I said when he answered. "Protocol is active. You are on speaker." I placed the phone in the breast pocket of my shirt, the camera lens facing outward, the microphone unblocked. I walked to the front door. The pounding started before I even reached the handle. "Open up," Uncle Jerry bellowed. "Open this door right now." Riley. You can't lock your mother out of her own property. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, leaving the storm door locked. It was a glass barrier between my peace and their chaos. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with their red-faced aggression. "Open this door," my mother hissed. She turned to Jerry. "She changed the locks. Jerry, she locked us out. All of our furniture is in there. My jewelry is in there. She is holding our property hostage." This was the narrative she had spun. She had told Jerry I was a squatter stealing their heirlooms. "Riley," Jerry said, stepping up to the glass, "you need to let your parents in. You don't own this place. You are acting like a brat. Now open the door before I take this door off the hinges." "If you touch that door," I said, my voice clear and loud, "you are committing a felony, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and since I'm recording this, and my attorney is on the line, the police will have a very easy time prosecuting you." Jerry hesitated. The word attorney usually has a cooling effect on heated tempers. "This is my house," my mother screamed, slapping her hand against the glass. "I lived here for 30 years. You cannot just steal it from me with some trick paperwork." I looked at her. I looked at the desperation in her eyes. She truly believed it. In her mind, her feelings trumped the law. Her entitlement superseded the deed. "If it is your house, Mother," I said, "then tell me the name on the deed." "It is my name," she shouted. "Warren and Gail Monroe." "No," I said. Read the deed, the one I gave you, the one you signed. I held up the copy of the recorded deed against the glass. The blue stamp of the county registrar was clearly visible. Read the grantee, I commanded. Jerry squinted at the paper. He read the line out loud. Hollow Crest Holdings, LLC. And who signed for the seller? I asked. Jerry looked closer. Warren Monroe, Gail Monroe. He turned to look at my mother. Gail, you signed this? You sold it to a company. I thought it was an investment group, my mother stammered, her narrative crumbling in real time. I didn't know it was her. She tricked us. You sold the house, I said, cutting through her noise. You took the money, you spent the money, and now you are standing on the porch of a property you no longer own, threatening the owner. My mother's face collapsed. The righteous anger drained away, leaving only a terrified, hollow shell. She realized that Uncle Jerry wasn't going to break the door down. She realized the neighbors were watching. She realized she had no moves left. And then, the universe decided to deliver the final blow. Marlo, standing by the car, suddenly let out a sharp cry. She was looking at her phone. Mom, she yelled. Mom, pick up your phone. My mother fumbled for her phone in her purse. What? She snapped. The leasing office. Marlo shouted, her voice shrill with panic. They just emailed us. They are rescinding the lease. They said there is a fraud alert on the credit profile. They are canceling the move-in. We have nowhere to go on Monday. The silence that fell over the porch was heavy enough to crush bone. My mother stared at the phone screen. The new life she had built on the foundation of my stolen identity had just evaporated. The fraud investigation I had initiated had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had frozen them out. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and hatred. You did this, she whispered. You called them. You canceled the lease. I reported unauthorized activity on my credit report, I said. If that canceled your lease, it is because you used my name to get it. It is your fault, she screamed, lunging at the glass again. We are going to be homeless. It is all your fault. No, I said. I opened the storm door and stepped out onto the porch. Uncle Jerry took a step back. I was 5'5", but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. It is not my fault, I said. It is your fault because you thought I was a tool. You thought I was a wallet you could open whenever you wanted. You thought I was a doormat you could wipe your feet on. You never saw me as a person. You only saw me as a utility. My father, who had been standing silently by the railing, finally looked up. His face was wet with tears. He looked at the chaos he had allowed to happen. He looked at his wife, screaming like a banshee. He looked at me, standing strong and cold. Riley, he choked out. He walked past my mother. He stood in front of me. I am sorry, he said. It wasn't the mumbled apology from the phone. It was a raw, broken sound. I am so sorry. We failed you. I failed you. He reached out a hand, as if to touch my shoulder. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean into it. I looked at his hand, the hand that had signed the sale papers, the hand that had signed the fraudulent loan application. I accept your apology, Dad, I said, but I don't need it. He looked stricken. What? I don't need your apology to heal, I said, and I don't need it to forgive you, because I am not looking for a relationship. I am looking for a conclusion. I reached into the folder I was holding. I pulled out the final document, the one Mr. Henderson had drafted as the ultimate failsafe. It was a formal separation agreement and release of claims. I am going to make this very simple, I said, addressing all of them. The police are currently reviewing the file regarding the identity theft. The bank is waiting for my final affidavit. If I submit it, you go to prison, both of you. My mother stopped crying. She listened. I am willing to withdraw the criminal complaint, I continued. I am willing to let you walk away without a felony record, but you have to sign this, right now. What is it? Uncle Jerry asked, his voice subdued. It is an agreement, I said. It states that you will return the $20,000 immediately. It states that you will never contact me again. No calls, no visits, no letters. You will acknowledge that this house is mine. You will acknowledge that you have no claim on me or my finances. If you break this agreement, the criminal charges are reinstated immediately. I held out the pen. Sign it, I said. And you can leave. Don't sign it, and I asked my lawyer to send the file to the district attorney. My mother looked at the paper. She looked at the house, the charcoal walls, the new life I had built inside. She realized she could not enter. She could not own it. She could not own me. She snatched the pen. She signed the paper against the porch railing, her movements jerky and angry. She didn't look at me. She signed it in hatred, which was fine. I didn't need her love. I needed her compliance. My father signed it next. He looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading for a bridge I had already burned. "Goodbye, Riley," he whispered. "Goodbye, Warren," I said. Marlo and Tessa walked up the driveway. They didn't say a word. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They realized that the quiet sister had just checkmated the entire family. They realized that their free ride was over. They got into the cars. Uncle Jerry gave me a confused look, shook his head, and got into his truck. I watched them reverse out of the driveway. I watched the silver sedan turn the corner and disappear. They were gone. They were homeless. They were broke. And they were legally barred from ever touching me again. I stood on the porch for a long time. The air was cool. The birds were singing. The silence was absolute. I turned around and walked back inside. I closed the heavy front door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I was sitting on the floor of the foyer. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. In, out. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just existed. For 29 years. I had asked for permission to speak. I had asked for permission to take up space. I had asked for permission to be loved. Now, sitting on the floor of a house that belonged to me in every sense of the word, I realized the truth. I didn't have to ask anymore. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that dinner table to this locked door, but I hope it brings some satisfaction to anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own home. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and share your city or country. And let me know if you think I was too harsh, or if I did exactly what needed to be done. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the content, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember the best revenge is living well and owning the deed.